Bridge by Mr. Copper. Night bridge inspections make people nervous. I never really understood why. Most people imagine it's the dark or the height or being underneath thousands of pounds of traffic. Truth is, after enough years, all of that just becomes another Tuesday night. I'd been inspecting bridges in southern Louisiana for almost 15 years when this happened. I'm not going to tell you the town. Not because I forgot it. I remember every inch of that bridge. I'd just rather not be responsible for somebody deciding to go looking around down there after hearing this story. People ask me every now and then if I still inspect bridges. I do. Just not that one. If you've never seen a bridge inspection at night, it probably isn't what you're picturing. You don't just shine a light around and call it good. You're looking for cracked welds, loose bolts, rust, damaged bearings, spalled concrete. Little things that don't look like much until they become somebody else's emergency 6 months later. Most folks only notice a bridge when it's closed. My job was making sure that didn't happen. The state liked us working nights whenever traffic allowed it. Less traffic meant fewer distractions. It also meant you could hear the bridge. That probably sounds strange unless you've worked around steel. Steel talks. As the temperature changes, it creaks. Expansion joints pop. A heavy truck crossing overhead sends a vibration through the whole structure that you can feel in your boots before you hear it. After enough years, you get to know those sounds. Bridges have personalities. Some are quiet. Some never stop talking. This one, it never sat right with me. I couldn't have told you why back then. It just felt off. It crossed a slow-moving bayou, surrounded by cypress trees so thick they swallowed what little moonlight made it through the clouds. Spanish moss hung from almost every limb, and on still nights it looked like old curtains draped over the swamp. Even during the day, it felt a little forgotten. At night, your headlamp became your entire world. Everything outside that beam simply disappeared. Above me was the underside of the bridge deck. Every now and then, headlights flashed between the steel girders as traffic rolled overhead. Below me was nothing but black water. Everything in between was steel. I'd inspected that bridge half a dozen times before. Every rust stain looked familiar. Every repair patch, every dent in the guardrail. There was even an expansion joint near the south end that always let out one loud pop sometime after midnight when the steel cooled off. The first time I'd heard it years earlier, I'd nearly climbed out of my harness. After that, I expected it. Funny how you get used to things. I parked the truck a little before midnight, set out my warning lights, grabbed my gear, and climbed over the guardrail. Harness, lanyard, headlamp, inspection hammer, notebook, 2 carpenter's pencils. I always carried 2. I had a habit of dropping one before the night was over. That little habit probably saved my life. Of course, I didn't know that then. Once you climb over the guardrail, you're in a different world. Most people only ever see the road. I spent my nights underneath it, walking the bridge's iron one careful step at a time, concrete above me, black water below, nothing in between but steel. The old inspector who trained me had a saying, 3 words, click, step, move, clip your lanyard to the next piece of steel, find your footing, then move. Get those out of order, he'd tell me, and the bridge will remind you. After enough years, you stop thinking about it. It just became rhythm. Click, step, move, inspect the steel, write a note, click, step, move. People think climbing under a bridge is dangerous because you're 50 feet above the water. It isn't. It's dangerous because the moment you stop respecting that 50 feet, the bridge reminds you. Every movement has to be deliberate, especially in Louisiana. Fog rolls in, steel sweats. By 2 or 3 in the morning, every surface starts collecting dew. I've seen good men take a bad step because they got in a hurry. I promised myself years before that I never would. The inspection started like every other one. Surface rust here, loose paint there, nothing unusual. A logging truck crossed overhead. The whole bridge gave a low groan that I felt more than heard. I waited for it to pass before making another note. A few minutes later, I dropped my inspection hammer. It bounced off a beam, struck one of the timber fenders wrapped around the bridge pier, and disappeared into the mud below. I muttered a few things I'm glad my mother never heard and worked my way across the iron until I found a safer place to climb down and grab it. That's night work. Nobody sees the graceful parts, only the mistakes. I brushed the mud off my gloves and kept going. A little while later, something changed. Not all at once, just enough that I noticed. The frogs had stopped. So had the crickets. Even the owl I'd been hearing off in the trees had gone quiet. The only sound left was water dripping from the bridge into the bayou. I stood there for a few seconds, listening. Then I shrugged. Animals go quiet sometimes. Usually there's a reason. I just figured I wasn't the reason. I kept working. A few minutes later, I reached one of the timber fenders wrapped around the concrete pier. If you've never looked underneath a bridge, they're hard to miss. Picture a thick wooden wall nearly 20 feet tall, built from massive treated timbers stacked one on top of another around the pier. Their job was simple. If a drifting work boat ever slammed into the bridge, it'd hit the wood before it hit the concrete. They spend their whole lives getting scarred up. That's why what I saw next didn't make any sense. Mud, fresh mud, smeared nearly 10 feet above the water line. I leaned out over the beam until my harness stopped me, ran my glove across it, still wet. I looked down at the bayou. The water wasn't even close. It sat 8 or 10 feet below the mark. I remember staring at it longer than I should have. Not because it frightened me, because I couldn't make sense of it. Bridge inspectors spend half their lives looking for things that don't belong. Rust where it shouldn't be. Cracks where there weren't any last year. Fresh damage. That mud didn't belong. I made myself a note to ask maintenance if they'd had equipment out there recently. I was about to close my notebook when something else caught my eye. 4 scratches, long, perfectly parallel. I stepped closer, ran my glove across them. They weren't deep, just deep enough to expose fresh wood beneath years of weather and river stain. Fresh. Whatever had made them hadn't been there long. I held my hand beside them, too far apart to be my fingers, too straight to be random damage, too clean to have been there on my last inspection. I studied them for another few seconds before shaking my head. I'd seen stranger things over 15 years, not many, but a few. So I wrote it down and went back to work. I shrugged it off, made another note. Click, step, move. That was my rhythm every night for almost 15 years. Inspect the steel. Write a note. Click, step, move. The bridge never seemed to end. The farther I worked from the road, the quieter everything became. No traffic, no wind. Just me and the bridge. I remember thinking how strange it was that the frogs still hadn't started back up. Usually they'd go quiet for a minute or two. Then one would start, then another. Pretty soon the whole swamp would wake back up again. Not that night. That quiet stayed with me. I stopped once and listened. Nothing. I even laughed to myself. Said out loud, "Y'all can come back now." Stupid thing to say. I wasn't talking to anything in particular, just trying to break the silence. Nobody answered. I kept working. Another crack to measure. Another bearing to inspect. Another note in the notebook. Nothing unusual. At least, nothing I recognized as unusual. By then, I'd worked my way almost to the highest part of the bridge. My shoulders were starting to burn. My knees weren't much happier. I figured I'd earned a drink of water before finishing the last section. I figured I had maybe another half hour before I could call it a night. That was a good feeling. The hard part of the inspection was behind me. Just finish the last section, climb back to the deck, write up my notes, and head home. I pulled my water bottle from my back pocket and took a long drink. I still remember how cold that water was. Funny the things your mind decides to remember. I screwed the cap back on, slid the bottle into my pocket, and reached for my notebook to see what I'd left. The second I pulled it free, my carpenter's pencil slipped from the spiral binding. Pure instinct. I watched it fall. My headlamp followed it all the way down. The beam stayed on it as it bounced once off a crossmember, then disappeared past the concrete pier. That's when I noticed the hand. It wasn't at the bottom of the pier. It was already halfway up. It hadn't made a sound. For a split second, my brain tried to tell me it was a wolf. Except wolves don't climb bridge piers. It looked like a wolf stretched into the shape of a man. That couldn't be right. I blinked once, then again, honestly wondering if my headlamp was throwing strange shadows across the concrete. It wasn't. The hand was still there. Long fingers curled around the edge of the pier. Dark, wet fur covered the forearm. The arm itself looked wrong. Too long, too lean. My headlamp drifted a little higher before I even realized I was moving it. A shoulder, more wet, matted fur. Part of a long muzzle, one pointed ear. It wasn't hiding. It wasn't looking at me. Its head was turned slightly away. Nose lifted into the damp Louisiana air like it was searching for a scent. Then, as if it felt me watching it, it seemed to catch my scent. Its head slowly turned toward me. Our eyes met. Neither of us moved. Then it reached up with another hand and continued climbing. Its eyes never left mine. That's when the fear finally hit me. Not panic. Clarity. I knew I needed to leave. I was 50 feet in the air, clipped into my harness. There was no running, only climbing. I turned as fast as the bridge would let me. Every instinct I had wanted to move faster. Experience wouldn't let me. I looked up toward the bridge deck. It felt miles away. Too much bridge, too much iron, too far. Fear kept whispering the same thing. Hurry. Don't. Experience answered every time. Steel doesn't care why you fall. I took one slow breath. Click, step, move. I looked down, found the next attachment point. Clicked in, one careful step and move. I looked back. It was still on the concrete. 2 cross members below me, roughly 15 feet away, climbing, slow, steady, like it already knew how this was going to end. I looked away again. Click, step, move. Every time I looked down, I hated it. Every second my eyes weren't on that thing felt like a gamble. Another clip, one careful step, move. I looked back again. My stomach dropped. It wasn't on the concrete anymore. It was pulling itself onto the iron. the same iron I was standing on. For the first time, I got a clear look at it. It had to stand 8 or 9 feet tall, lean, not bulky, built like something that lived by running things down until they got tired. Its arms hung lower than they should have. Each hand ended in black claws that scraped softly across the steel as it walked. Its legs bent like a wolf's. Its head didn't. It wasn't a wolf's head. It wasn't a man's either. It was something caught somewhere in between. Its ears twitched constantly. Listening, its eyes found mine again. Amber, calm, almost curious. There wasn't an ounce of anger in them. That scared me more than if it had been snarling. It wasn't excited. It wasn't threatened. It was just looking at me. Then, it took one slow step toward me. Steel groaned beneath its weight. Another step. I couldn't go anywhere. My back was against the steel beam. Another step. I could feel its breath, hot, slow, ragged. It stopped, less than 6 feet away. Close enough that I could smell wet dog, swamp water, something metallic underneath. Blood, maybe. I don't know. Its nose twitched. Once, then again. It wasn't smelling me. It was smelling something beyond me. Something in the swamp. I watched those amber eyes. Looked through me. Then past me. Its ears turned. It stood there another second. Then it turned. One careful step. Then another. Every step was balanced, deliberate, confident. It never looked back. Within a few seconds, it disappeared into the darkness beneath the bridge. Just like that. It was gone. I didn't move. Not right away. I stood there listening, waiting for it to come back. The swamp stayed quiet. Then, one at a time, the frogs started calling again. A few crickets joined them. Within a minute, it sounded like the swamp had decided nothing had happened. I remember thinking, something happened, whether the swamp wanted to admit it or not. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe a minute, maybe 5. Long enough for my breathing to slow down, not long enough for my hands to stop shaking. I reached for my lanyard, missed it. I looked down, tried again. Click, step, move. The words didn't calm me anymore. They just gave my hand something to follow. Every time I looked down to find my next clip point, I wondered if I'd look back up and see it standing there again. I never did. Click, step, move. By then, my shoulders were burning. My legs felt like rubber. I wasn't climbing fast. I couldn't. Every clip had to be right. Every step had to land where it belonged. Fear doesn't make wet steel any less slippery. If anything, it makes you forget the things that keep you alive. I wasn't about to let that happen. Not after making it this far. It took me almost twice as long to reach the bridge deck as it normally would have. I never looked down again. Not because the climb was harder, because I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. I've thought about that climb more times than I can count. If that thing had decided to keep coming, it would have caught me long before I reached the top. I didn't make it back because I was faster. I made it back because it decided to leave. I climbed over the guardrail and sat down on the shoulder of the bridge. I didn't care that my jeans were soaking wet. I didn't care that my notebook had fallen open beside me. I just sat there, listening to traffic, watching headlights pass, trying to convince myself I'd just imagined the last 20 minutes. I hadn't. When I finally stood up, I gathered my gear. Everything was there. Hammer, notebook, headlamp, one carpenter's pencil. The other one was still somewhere beneath that bridge. I thought about climbing back down to get it. That thought lasted maybe half a second. I threw my gear into the truck, climbed behind the wheel, and just sat there with both hands on it. The engine wasn't even running yet. I was staring through the windshield at a bridge I'd inspected half a dozen times before. It looked exactly the same. Concrete, steel, guardrails, traffic. If someone had driven across it right then, they'd never have known what had been standing underneath it a few minutes earlier. I started the truck, pulled away. I never looked in the mirror. People ask me sometimes if I ever finished that inspection. No. I wrote it up the next morning, and somebody else went back a few weeks later. As for me, I've inspected a lot of bridges since then. Just not that one.